Hello again. Now, when I say communicating, you might often think about, the words that we use in language, but there's a whole other part of communication that you might not have thought much about, and that is what is referred to as nonverbal communication. And it's a pretty important thing because if you were to imagine a conversation you have with somebody and you want to think about the meaning that the person takes from that interaction and you were to picture it like a pie, what percentage of the meaning from that interaction, what percentage of that pie comes from the words that you use versus the nonverbal stuff? Well, you might be surprised to know that approximately 93% of the meaning that we take from any communication encounter comes from the nonverbals. So it plays a huge part in successful communication interactions. And as you might guess, even though it doesn't involve language, nonverbal communication, what gestures and whatnot tend to mean one thing in one culture can mean something very different in the next. So, what nonverbal communication is and the various aspects of it is the focus of this video. So, as I said, nonverbal communication, probably to some extent even more obscure, if you will, than verbal communication, because nonverbals fluctuate incredibly across cultures and subcultures and all kinds of things. Because unlike language that you take classes to learn, like English or grammar and whatnot, it doesn't apply to nonverbal. Very situationally based, culturally based, contextually based. So a lot goes into them. And so we need to talk a bit about what they are, the different types, and how they work. So first off, well, what is nonverbal communication? Basically, it's anything that communicates other than language. Anything that sends a message outside of the specific words that you use is in the realm of nonverbal communication. So, when most of you probably have thought about nonverbal communication, you've probably thought about things like gestures and so forth, and that is nonverbal. But there is a lot more that goes into nonverbal communication and several different aspects of it that we need to probably go over. So, these are called nonverbal codes, the different types of nonverbal communication. So, one of the first ones is actually referred to as paralinguistics. Now, what is this? Paralinguistics refers to the study of how vocal behaviors communicate. Things like changes in pitch, volume, speaking rate. This is what paralinguistics focus on because this says a lot. If you come up to me and go, "Hey, Mr. DeBerry, how are you doing?" If I say, "I'm great," versus, "I'm great," just those vocal changes, you're going to interpret things differently. Okay, so how fast you talk, slow you talk, what causes those variations in our voice to just naturally happen, that's what paralinguistics is all about. And again, those do communicate a message. There's also personal space. You may have not thought about this, but space, and I'm not talking about like Star Trek, Star Wars space, but the physical space around us is a communicative tool. Okay. Number one, there's this idea called territoriality, and that basically says that we tend to mark our space as ours somehow. I don't know anything about you on a personal level, but I'd be willing to bet that if I went to your house, nobody's there. It's just what your house looks like with nobody in it. I could probably walk around and take a pretty solid guess at which room was yours, simply by what's in it. Does it look different than like your little brother or sister's room? Does it look different than your parents' room as far as how it's decorated? Chances are, yeah. That's territoriality. You see this all over the place. If you've ever been to like an office cubicle area, you probably see people marking their cubicle with their special pen or their special cup or their little figurines or whatever. So that's territoriality. It's also a communicative tool about relationship status. And what do I mean? The guy that really did a lot of work in this, his name is Edward Hall. And he talks about how there's these zones around us, that how much space we tend to keep between us and other people, or who we let into what spatial zone, is often indicative of communicating their relationship. Like, for example, the intimate zone is 0 to 18 inches. Now, there's going to be cases where it involuntarily happens, like on a packed elevator. But who do you voluntarily get between 0 and 18 inches of you? Usually people you care deeply about, family, romantic partner. If I was in class as your teacher and I just got up right next to you and talked for an hour, you'd feel weird because that's not who we let within that zone. And then you have like the next zone. I forget the exact titles, but the next one was like 18 inches to 4 feet. That's where you let friends in, people you have, you're close with, and there's like 4 to 8 feet. That's more I'm just out with people. I'm in like a public space. I know you, but I'm not really friends with you, but I don't, I know who you are, versus 8 feet and up, 12 feet and up. That's the public zone. That's when we're out. We want to keep that buffer between us and total strangers. If you ever, for example, go to the mall, like during Christmas, you'll notice people tend to group up and walk the mall in groups. And if you notice, next time you go, look, they keep about 12 feet between each other. Now, it's not an exact science, it's not 12 feet, go away, because, people will cut in and whatnot, but that's what we mean by personal space. So it's who we let into our space, how we mark our space. Those are all things that communicate just based on space. Physical appearance is another one. Now, we can talk all day about whether or not people should or shouldn't, but I think we would have to agree that people will and do judge you based on how you look. Simple fact of life. Maybe people shouldn't, but they do, and they will. Okay. If we were taking this class in a physical classroom and I showed up as the teacher the first day of class wearing flip-flops, a pair of blue jeans with holes in them, a hemp rope as a belt, a tie-dye t-shirt with Grateful Dead bears all on it, a pair of blue John Lennon circular sunglasses, and a Rastafarian hat, what would you probably think? Probably at least one of you would think, I get this dude a dime bag, I'm making an A. But that's not what you would expect. That you're going to make assumptions about me based on how I look. Again, you don't go to a job interview wearing, a tank top and shorts, maybe not unless it's for a lifeguard, but that's not how that works. So we can talk all day about whether or not people should or shouldn't, but they will judge you based on your appearance. And we use our appearance to communicate things. For example, again, not smashing anybody, but I want you to think about when you were in school, was there a group of kids that were kind of considered the renegades, the rebels? Back when I was in high school, it was the grunge kids. Before then, in the 80s, it was the punk rockers. And then you had, the hippies and the beatniks and all that, up through more recently, the emo kids and so forth. Think of those groups. How many of them tended to try to distinguish themselves by personal appearance? They had unique haircuts. They wore distinctive clothing. Okay, how we communicate. All right. So physical appearance, how you look, the clothes that you're wearing, all those do communicate messages, whether you intend it to or not, they do. And people will make judgments based on that. Eye contact's a huge one. Okay. Do you look at people, and who do you not look at? This is very culture dependent. For example, in the United States, it's normal in education for students to look at the teacher when they're talking. Now, I had a very strong mentor in my life named Dr. Frank Millar when I was at the University of Wyoming, and he taught for a year in Japan. There was a teacher exchange with, I think, Tokyo University or something. And when he told us this story about how when he got over there, the first couple weeks, he really was struggling because the students wouldn't look at him. And he's used to an American audience where you look at the teacher, and he couldn't figure out why. And then finally he asked, and one of the other teachers who was Japanese told him, well, of course they're not. That's a sign of respect. They're not going to look you in the eye because that would be saying they're your equal, and they're not. And so Dr. Millar kind of had to work with the class and tell them, okay, where I'm from, this is the norm. So in here, do this. And this is kind of what I'm wanting. And it was difficult for them, and it was difficult for him. But it's like I talk about when I teach public speaking. I tell students, I know looking at the audience may make you very nervous, but it's not an option because eye contact is a measure of credibility. Would you buy something from a salesperson who refused to look at you? Chances are probably not. So what type of eye contact is expected? Who do we look at? Who do we avoid looking at? And what type of gaze we have? Those, again, are all things culturally dynamic that do communicate, as well as facial expressions. Okay, smiling, nodding, grimacing, these all communicate things, and they can be vary between culture. I had a friend of mine when I was in the military who was flying relief missions into the country of Nepal. And the airfield wasn't an airport. It was just something they'd gone in and bulldozed to make this flat area for them to land in this very remote region. And the first couple days of the mission, everything was going wrong. And it kind of dealt with facial expressions and nonverbal, because my buddy, whose name was Ed and a lot of the other Marines, they didn't speak a lot of the local language, and they didn't speak any English. So majority of the communication was being done with gestures, and facial expressions. And in the native culture in this area, this facial expression gesture meant no. This facial expression gesture meant yes. Now imagine you don't speak no Nepalese, they don't speak no English, you're relying on gestures. How much is that one simple change going to screw everything up? So these do communicate things. We need to keep that in mind. Gestures are another huge one. And gestures are very different across cultures, and then with subcultures. For example, I'm a licensed scuba diver, okay? Now, most places, if somebody says, hey, how are you doing? And you go, that means I'm doing okay, right? Do not do this in scuba diving, because in scuba diving, doing a thumbs up like this means emergency surface. Okay, this means I'm having trouble. We need to surface now. If somebody looks at you and you do like this and you're underwater scuba diving, they will more likely grab you by your scuba vest, possibly yank your regulator out, put their emergency regulator in your mouth, and they will take you straight to the surface, because that means emergency. The way you tell somebody you're doing fine or you're okay in scuba diving, you always do the okay sign. You do not do this, which can be problematic in some countries where this is the equivalent of calling somebody a butthole. It's the equivalent of flipping them off. I mean, there's not a lot of rhyme and reason for this. It just is what it is. But when we talk about gestures, we do need to understand there are roughly 4 basic categories of gestures. And again, these can, what they do is the same, but what gestures do these can vary between cultures. And the first one are emblems. Okay, emblems have a specific verbal translation. Okay, like if I go, that means come here. Okay, that is an emblem. I don't have to say anything. And you know what that means. So an emblem is something that does not need words to accompany it in order for the meaning to be transferred. Okay, now slightly different than this is what is called illustrators. Now, illustrators go along with speech. You don't use them in and of themselves. You use them with speech to help amplify it. Like I'm doing now with my hands when I'm talking and doing this. This is an illustrator. It's meant to enhance the message I'm giving verbally. So if somebody says, what are you doing tonight? And you go, I don't know. You say, I don't know. This goes to illustrate what you mean. It goes to amplify it. Okay. So that's what an illustrator is. It accompanies an actual word or phrase to help amplify it or add emphasis. Now, our fourth one is what is called regulators. Regulators are a type of nonverbal behavior that literally regulates communication flow. It controls communication flow. It decides who speaks and who doesn't speak in waiting your turn. Classic example of this you're probably all familiar with is raising your hand in class. Because what do you do when you raise your hand? You're seeking permission to talk. And then typically the professor will be like, yes, point, acknowledge you, then you can speak. Okay, that is a regulator. You don't just start saying things. If you raise your hand to get acknowledged, that is a regulatory function. It is controlling the speaking flow. Also, somebody tries to talk to you and you go, and you do something like this, like, wait just a second. You're regulating communication flow. You're controlling who talks and for how long. That's the function of regulators. Then our last category, are called adapters. And adapters serve 2 functions. Number one, they are there to help you adapt to your environment. Okay? For example, you ever been outside and it's been cold and you've done this? What is this doing? Yeah, it says you're cold, but what else is it doing? It's trying to help you stay warm. You're adapting to the environment. Or if you're hot and you're doing this, adapting to the environment. So it's like when you're tired in class and you're doing this right here, again, adapting to the environment. So that's one function of adapters. They are also there as an emotional outlet. Now, what does this mean? These are things like if you've ever been in class and you've been a little bored and you start bouncing a leg or doing something like you're. I see this a lot when I teach public speaking. Students will be giving speech and they'll start doing this because they're nervous. That's an adapter. Okay, it's an emotional outlet. Doesn't serve the function of replacing a verbal message. It's not trying to regulate communication flow. It's not accompanying a verbal message. It is a way to get emotions out. Okay, nervousness, anxiousness, whatever. So that's what an adapter is. So every gesture in the world can fall into one of these four. It's just what those gestures happen to be can change significantly between cultures and subcultures. Like this being okay versus emergency surface, you want to use this, or this meaning flipping somebody off in some countries. Hence the thing. Some other nonverbal codes, time orientation. You might not have thought about this, but time does communicate. Who you spend time with. Does that communicate? If somebody said they loved you and they wanted to be in a relationship with you but never would spend time with you, would you believe them? If you pass a golf course at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday and you see a couple people out there playing, what might you naturally assume about those people playing at a golf course at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday? You'd probably think retired, wealthy, or business people at a business meeting over golf. Why would you think that? Because who's going to be playing golf at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday? See what I mean? When we have time, who we spend it is, who can do things with time. These are all things that communicate. Now, culturally, there's two, again, not opposite categories, opposite ends of a sliding scale, cultural views about time. And the first one of these is called monochronic time. Now, a monochronic culture very much views time as a commodity. All right. In the United States, we are firmly in the monochronic culture. You ever heard the thing, time is money? That's textbook monochronic orientation. Okay, because time is viewed as a commodity, it is rationed, it is scheduled. So things like making appointments, scheduling, set times to do things. You get 30 minutes for lunch. Those are all things you tend to have in a monochronic system, all right, where it's viewed as a commodity that is spent, and so it needs to be spent wisely. Whereas in a polychronic orientation, time is more so viewed as holistic and circular. It's not a commodity. There's more of a loose idea about it. If you say, what time do you get up? And somebody says, when I wake up, that's a polychronic orientation versus I wake up at 6:30. That's monochronic orientation. I remember when I was younger, my whole family went on vacation to Hawaii. And when we got there, our tour guide was talking to us and he mentioned this concept of what he called island time, which is a polychronic idea. It's this point of says it starts at 3:30. That can mean anything from 1:30 to like 5. There's this window. That's more of that polychronic orientation. So if a culture is very regimented with schedules and exact times for things, that's more monochronic. If this is more just kind of, I eat when I'm hungry, I'll wake up when I can, I'll be there 4-ish, and that is like a 4-hour window, that's more of a polychronic orientation. And then another thing, nonverbal, is silence. Because remember, when you're silent, you're not saying any language, and hence that's why it is nonverbal. And silence does communicate. When you don't say something. My professor, Dr. Millar, he would, kind of same as me, he tends to have a conversation orientation to teaching. He asks a lot of questions, asks for audience feedback. Again, this was something he was very shocked by when he taught in Japan because he couldn't get the students to say anything. Now, in the United States, we tend to view that as disengaged, not caring. They just don't want to engage with the material. There, it was respect. I'm not saying a word because you are the teacher. My job is to be quiet and listen to your wisdom. So see that difference in silence? You ever been so mad with somebody you just can't say a word? Or like you have somebody in your family that once they quit talking, that's when you better throw on a helmet and run? Silence communicates even though there's no words. It's the whole point of nonverbal communication. So that's some of the basic overview of it. And again, this wasn't meant to just give you the end all be all on nonverbal, just to give you a general idea of kind of what it is, the different aspects of it, and why it can vary between cultures. Because again, there's no rules for this. A lot of these come again from historical things that we don't know about. Why does this mean okay? I don't know. Typically this means I'm fine because I was told that it did by my mama, who was told it by her mama, who was told it by her mama. Why? I don't know. But that's what you had to think about with nonverbal. And so again, anything that communicates outside of the specific words you use, from how you say those words to your posture to everything, that's all part of nonverbal communication. And like I said, in any communication encounter, nonverbal communication accounts for 93% of the meaning taken. So in many ways, it's much more important than verbal. So I hope you can see how important nonverbal communication is and how relevant it is to everything we do. Again, think of all the things that communicate without saying a word. Okay, this is really, I talked about Ed Hall and those and so forth. Another big guy in there here is a guy named Alfred Morabian, who has his ideas of high context versus low context environments. And high context environments tend to oversaturate people with stimuli, make them nervous, whereas low context tends to make you calmer. And his idea, it's nonverbal communication, and it's a cornerstone of restaurant design and store design as far as trying to put the patrons in a mood that they want them to. Most fast food restaurants are high context, brighter colors, harder surfaces. Why? Because they want you in and out in under 15 minutes. You don't wait 2 hours to get McDonald's. Whereas Olive Garden, more neutral tones, darker environment, softer textures, because they want you to hang around and make more money off drinks and appetizers. You'll wait 2 hours to eat at Olive Garden. You probably won't eat at Burger King. So simple things like that can communicate. So again, they're not governed by rules. They're very cultural specific. And I hope this gives you a better idea of what all's involved in it and all the different factors that play when dealing with nonverbal communication. And as always, with that being said, I hope you got something out of this, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.